afternoon, everyone. I'll be on stage this afternoon with two amazing public servants. First up is Preet Bharara. Many of you have heard of him, but you finally get to meet him in California. Preet is a Harvard graduate, and then he got his JD from Columbia. He worked for Senator Chuck Schumer as one of his key staff members. Following that, he was United States Attorney in Manhattan, Assistant United States Attorney in Manhattan. And in 2009, President Obama nominated him to be the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. And he was confirmed unanimously by the US Senate. Preet is on the Time Magazine 100 Most Influential list. He's gotten numerous awards. He also is a much sought after speaker at commencements. So last year, I don't know if you knew, he was at Harvard Law School giving a speech, and they tag teamed him with Mindy Kaling. Unfortunately, we couldn't have Mindy today, so Preet is going to have to cook up his own jokes. So Preet will make some opening remarks. Following that, I will have the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to prosecute him right here on stage. Okay? Sorry, I'm going to interview him on stage. Okay? So please welcome Preet Bharara, who has no jurisdiction over the state of California.
Great. Thank you, MR, for that introduction. It's nice to be here. I do want to make one correction. I absolutely do have jurisdiction in California. In fact, we were discussing backstage how many people were going to show up for this. I don't know if it's everyone was able to make it into the hall for this presentation, but obviously we will be taking a very serious investigative look at those who did not show up. From time to time, people ask me, given what your office does and how you bring white-collar cases against sometimes, gang members and sometimes people involved in the cyber world and sometimes people involved in business, why do you come and speak to groups like this, to business groups? And I say, it's because I really love the sound of nervous laughter. Thank you. All kidding aside, everyone has been very nice to me here at TiEcon. I did have a one moment of panic when I was backstage. As we were coming out here and getting ready, somebody said, "Preet, we need to wire you up." And I said, I think you have that backwards. I wanted to spend a minute talking about the government and innovation and entrepreneurship, because I know you care about it, and it may come as a surprise that people in government, and I specifically, care about it too. It was mentioned that I sometimes give commencement addresses. That's true. Yesterday morning, I gave the commencement address to a large group like this at Berkeley Law School. And it may surprise you to know that I spent a considerable amount of my time telling the Berkeley law students who were graduating, 25 to 30% of whom will come to Silicon Valley in some way following one of their most famous alumni, Larry Sonsini. And I spent a certain amount of time telling them that, here we are in the shadow of Silicon Valley, and a lot of the values and the spirit of startups and of the tech industry are things that the law and legal institutions and governments should care about and think about also. And we don't do it enough. Innovation is not something that should stop at the border of Silicon Valley. It should extend all over the country. It should extend to Washington, D.C. It should extend to U.S. attorneys' offices and to government bureaucracies. And there's not enough of that. And part of the message to them, which I think is consistent with the message that you all internalize and take to heart and try to transmit everywhere, is that all institutions, including legal institutions, we need risk takers too. We need innovators too. We need entrepreneurs too. Now, in that respect, maybe there's a little bit of DNA in the Bharara family. Maybe in future years you'll have my brother come speak. He is an actual certifiable and certified entrepreneur who sold his company that he started a few years ago, diapers.com, to Amazon for $540 million. The upshot of which in my family is that now he pays for dinner and lunch and breakfast and everything else. There's good news and there's bad news with respect to the government. When I think about, so the bad news is that government is unfortunately quite slow to adopt innovation and to think in an entrepreneurial way. And I think you all know that. It doesn't come as any surprise to anyone, especially when you're talking about technology. I mean, to give you some sense, in my office, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and throughout the department, and even in law firms, until fairly recently, the word processing program of choice was WordPerfect. Gasps. To put it another way, most people in my office still use a BlackBerry. I don't know if you remember what this is like. Social media is something also that government doesn't do a good job of understanding and appreciating, even though it's now the case, as Director Jim Comey of the FBI said recently, that homegrown militants who want to do harm against the country and want to join ISIS are using Twitter and other social media as a medium to do so. So the work is cut out. Government is slow to do these things, and I think part of the importance of having not just like-minded people in business to come to conferences like this, but also having people from government is for us to learn from you and figure out how we can do a better job of being entrepreneurs and risk takers and leaders and innovators in our own institutions. Now, the good news is that I think it's getting better, and people are trying. I mean, I think about my own job, and obviously, I'm a prosecutor by training, and I'm the head prosecutor of an office established in 1789 at the founding of the Republic, the Southern District of New York. But I'm also equal parts CEO of the institution also. I have a staff. I have 450 or so employees in my office. I have a budget of about $50 million. I will say, incidentally, that given all the criminal penalties that we get and the asset forfeiture that we do, our rate on return to the taxpayer on the $50 million, depending on the year, is about 20, 30, or 40 times what we cost. So, better than every hedge fund you've ever heard of. Now I know what gets you to clap. It's good to know. But I, as a CEO of an institution, have to worry also, like all of you do, about resource allocation. Where does it make sense to put my personnel? Where does it make sense to spend my time? Who should I promote? What should the structures be? And how do we go about doing our job? Now, obviously, I'm not in the tech industry. I don't make a product. I'm in the business of making sure that we do justice. And we do the right thing in the right way for the right reasons every time we make a decision. And not everyone agrees with our decisions every time we make one. Some people think we're too soft. Some people think we're too tough and too strong. But we're always doing the best we can with, I think, the best career, public service-oriented lawyers and staff in the country. But my other job, I think, as CEO, and the way I do think about it, and why I like coming to Silicon Valley and to Northern California and the Bay Area, is to innovate. And we have been thinking about ways to innovate. Maybe something we'll get into in the Q&A is how much the government is doing a better job of embracing technology. I was the first U.S. attorney in the country, and there are 92 of us, who decided to have a contractual relationship with a very impressive and successful Silicon Valley company, Palantir, who was making a pitch to figure out ways that we could go through the mountain of data that we otherwise collect to try to figure out where the fraud was happening or to help us with our trial work. And that had never been done before because I think there is a mindset that folks who in another part of the country that are new and that they don't have a relationship with are not the kinds of people that you want to do business with, and I think that's a mistake, and that's wrong. In the cyber area, which I know a lot of people care about, we're trying to be more innovative and understand more about technology. When I first came to the U.S. Attorney's Office, I think we had maybe one person who was expert, and the FBI had 1 or 2 squads dedicated to the cyber threat. Now it's 10 times that, and now you have the FBI director, even the President of the United States talking about the cyber threat. And I think we have more work to do in government, but we're getting better at understanding technology. We need folks like you to engage with us and make sure that we're understanding things from your perspective. All sorts of issues, whether you're talking about encryption, the cyber threat, the loss of infrastructure. There was a train derailment recently that some people suggest is a result of a failure to embrace modern technology. All of those things affect everyone's lives, whether you're in the private sector or in the public sector. So I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit beyond what people often think about in terms of some of the cases we bring. We do think about innovation. We do care about entrepreneurship. It's in my blood. It's in my family's blood. And it needs to be in the blood of more people who have important positions in government here. So I'm delighted to be with you, and I think I'm going to submit myself to some questions. There you go. Yes.
Glad to have you here in California. And let's get down to business. This crowd here really wants to know a couple of things from you. The first one is you're in government, you're in the legal profession, and you use a lot of technology. So what are the white spaces, what are the opportunities where these guys can start companies?
As I mentioned in my remarks a second ago, I think there are a lot of opportunities. You just have to think about what they are. I mean, government is lacking expertise, it's lacking understanding, it's lacking an openness to all sorts of things. Probably the most important area that I mentioned, and I know you've talked about at some of the panels yesterday and today, is the cyber area. I mean, there are the threat to the financial infrastructure and to conventional infrastructure, as you think about it, is enormous. And I've come and spoken on other occasions to folks at Stanford and elsewhere in Silicon Valley, and the problem is people in business don't necessarily understand that there is a market for those things. If people are figuring out ways to get ahead of the curve, you just have to find the right product to make. And so I think if you follow, I mentioned a company also that created a great software platform, you have to figure out opportunities to get into the government space. Part of the problem is a culture problem, I think. When you have procurement officers and others who are a little bit behind the times, not to criticize anyone in government, they may not immediately run to the new company that is not established. More often than not, it's a very old line established company whose CEO is a former admiral in the Navy, people who they can relate to and maybe have known from government service before. And the first time they come across somebody who's representing a company that may have a brilliant innovation, but that person is wearing purple pants, they don't necessarily, when in government, it's very conservative. Like I wore a tie. It's TiEcon after all.
I got to remember that one.
So you have. I think part of the opportunity will come from engaging with folks in government. I don't think there's enough engagement back and forth. That's why I think this is an important conference to have.
So selling to the government is, as you mentioned, a very different proposition. So people have to spend time in Washington. They have to and the sales cycles are much longer than selling to a regular company. How do you deal with that?
I'll take the example that I mentioned. So I like to think of myself as a progressive, innovative type person. But again, government is very conventional and it's very traditional and it's based on precedent. And people will do things the same way year after year after year just because it was done that way. I like to have, there's a new tradition in my office where if anybody ever answers a question that I ask, I say, why are we doing that? And if they say, because that's how we've always done it, I get very angry. But that's not always the case. And even though I think I'm progressive and open-minded, when a friend of mine who worked at that company I mentioned offered to pitch us on how this software platform would be a cheaper alternative to the things that we were using, and it could help us find fraudsters at lower cost, and it would be very easy to use, I didn't return the call, I didn't take the meeting, and this was actually somebody who was a friend of mine, and I consider myself to be open-minded to these things, because I didn't know of anyone else who was using that company's services. But the person was persistent and kept calling, and I finally, almost out of courtesy, I took the meeting. And the presentation, when you do the presentation, it should be an excellent presentation for Luddites like I think I was. And the presentation was so impressive that I had other people from my office sit in on it, and then they were impressed too. But it took a long time for the idea of this new software. People in my office were thinking, well, we have Excel. Why do we need anything else? You see how silly that is. And even though we were open-minded to it, it took a year or two for us to finally have a partnership with them. So I guess the advice would be look for those opportunities, because the government, by the way, is one of the biggest contractors in the world, and they need it to do good things. I mean, we need these services so we can do good things and hold people accountable. But my advice would be to be persistent and be patient. And the third piece of advice I would have is when you're trying to make inroads, if you have first of all, you have to have a good product or a good service. Assuming you do, don't always just find the inroad to the chief technology officer or the person who handles internet security, depending on what your product is. I mean, no disrespect to those folks, but they don't always have in the company the juice to cause other people in the company to want to spend $5, $10, $15, $50 million for some kind of enterprise contract. You have to find through your networks and by your presentation ability the individuals in those companies who are forward-thinking and who are open-minded, who can make the right introductions. And even with companies that I've dealt with, when they're trying to make inroads into other government bureaucracies, they're often going to the tech person, and the tech people are great. But government, given what it is, and given all the things that I said a moment ago, they don't necessarily have the capital at the company that's going to get you in.
Let's move on to a different area of your life. Your brother is an entrepreneur, but you chose public service. So what went through your mind in terms of people giving back to society and doing a public good?
I went into public service when I was in year 2000. I thought it was going to be a few years. Now it's almost 16 years. I think that if you are the beneficiary of the American dream, like my family was, I came to the United States when I was a little over a year old from India, I think you have to give something back. And this country has given me so much, I don't think that I will have enough breaths in my body to give back what I think I owe my country. And my brother is an entrepreneur now, but he wants to give back too, and he will find many, many ways to do that. And the particular form of public service that I chose is one where I thought I had some skill. I always wanted to be a lawyer. I always wanted to be a trial lawyer. But the job is, again, not everyone agrees with everything that we do, but the mission and the job is, companies have mission statements, serve the customer or be excellent. Our mission statement is the same as it's been since 1789, and that is to do justice. And now a lot of lawyers have bad reputations in the country, and some of it is deserved. I told the students at Berkeley yesterday, they're joining a much maligned profession that, if practiced properly and idealistically, is a very noble profession. But I get to be in a job where we don't take any position that we don't believe in. We don't advocate on behalf of any particular client because it's going to put money in our pocket. Our job is to make sure that justice is done, not that people are convicted, not in getting as many convictions as possible and notching victories on our belt, but to make sure that the right thing is done. And we should be judged not only by the cases we bring, but by the cases that we walk away from. And I don't know any other area of public service, particularly as a lawyer, when I can wake up every morning and believe that I've done the best that I have been able to do, and that we're all doing things for the right reasons. And there's nothing more gratifying than that.
Okay, on a fun note, most of us here are San Francisco Giants fans, right? We won 3 World Series in the last 5 years. I know you're a Yankees fan.
Yeah. But in the history of baseball, how does San Francisco compare to you?
I'm looking at...
I know Silicon Valley is very short-term oriented, but I'm just the whole...
Right. You're sure. Yeah. So, but we only win in even years, right? So who do you predict to win the championship this year?
I think the Yankees are doing pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah. What am I going to say? I have to say.
Great. Thanks, Preet. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Preet Bharara, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.